Loh Kiwan's life had never been easy. Growing up in North Korea meant constant hardship, poverty, oppression, and an ever-present sense of fear. His mother, Oh Kae-hee, was his only source of warmth in a world that seemed determined to crush them both. But as the political climate worsened and their situation became increasingly desperate, they were left with no choice but to flee to China, clinging to the hope of a better future. The journey across the border was grueling and fraught with danger. Every step felt like a gamble with their lives. They moved in silence, avoiding border guards, trusting only the whispered promises of smugglers. Eventually they made it into China, where they thought things might get easier. But reality quickly proved them wrong. Life as an undocumented refugee was a daily battle, with the constant fear of being caught and sent back to North Korea hanging over their heads like a dark cloud. Despite their struggles, Kiwan and his mother managed to scrape by, finding temporary shelter and odd jobs that barely put food on the table. But their fragile existence was shattered when tragedy struck. His mother fell seriously ill, and with no access to proper medical care, her condition worsened rapidly. Kiwan was faced with a cruel truth: they couldn't stay in China. They needed to move on. When a sudden raid by the Chinese authorities forced Kiwan into a corner, his mother made the ultimate sacrifice, urging him to escape while she stayed behind. With nothing but a small amount of money from his uncle and an overwhelming sense of loss, Kiwan boarded a smuggler's transport to Belgium, a country he knew nothing about, except that it held the promise of a fresh start. Arriving in Belgium was like stepping onto another planet. The towering buildings, the unfamiliar language, the cold, indifferent stares, all of it felt overwhelming. Kiwan soon learned that seeking asylum was no simple process. Bureaucratic hurdles, long waiting periods, and the scrutiny of immigration officers made it clear that the road ahead would be anything but smooth. Struggling to survive, Kiwan found himself living in an overcrowded refugee shelter, surrounded by strangers from different parts of the world, each carrying their own stories of loss and survival. Despite his efforts to integrate, he remained an outsider, isolated by the language barrier, cultural differences, and the weight of his past. It was during one of his aimless wanderings through the streets of Brussels that he encountered Marie, a young woman with a distant, almost haunted look in her eyes. Their first meeting was nothing more than a fleeting moment, a brief exchange of glances, a feeling of mutual recognition. But fate had other plans and their paths crossed again. Marie, once an accomplished sports shooter, had long since abandoned her ambitions, weighed down by the emotional scars of losing her mother. She was as lost in her world as Kiwan was in his, and perhaps that's what drew them together. Though their interactions were awkward at first, they slowly found solace in each other's company, despite their vastly different worlds. For Kiwan, Marie represented a glimpse of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic existence. For Marie, Kiwan's quiet resilience was a reminder that survival wasn't just about existing, it was about finding something worth fighting for. Yet, even with Marie's occasional support, Kiwan's challenges continued to mount. The asylum application process dragged on endlessly, with each rejection letter feeling like a door slammed shut in his face. As he struggled to hold on to hope, the harsh reality of his situation began to sink in. Belgium might not be the sanctuary he had envisioned after all. Days in Belgium felt like an endless cycle of uncertainty and exhaustion for Loh Kiwan. Each morning he woke up in the cramped refugee center, surrounded by people from all over the world, each carrying their own burdens, their own stories of escape and survival. Despite their shared experience of displacement, Kiwan still felt alone, isolated by language barriers and cultural differences that made integration seem impossible. The asylum process was an uphill battle. Paperwork, interviews, and long waiting periods tested his patience and resilience. Each question from the immigration officers felt like an interrogation rather than an opportunity to tell his story. They doubted his identity, his motives, and even the trauma he carried. The weight of rejection letters piled up, each one eroding his already fragile hope. Kiwan's dreams of a fresh start in Belgium were beginning to feel like an illusion, and he found himself trapped in a limbo with no clear way forward. In the midst of his struggles, Marie became an unexpected presence in his life. At first, their interactions were brief and impersonal. Marie was guarded, and Kiwan, naturally cautious, kept his distance. But over time, a quiet understanding grew between them. Marie, a former professional shooter, was grappling with her own demons. After losing her mother, she had retreated into a life devoid of purpose, drifting through days with no real direction. Despite her aloof exterior, Marie recognized something familiar in Kiwan's eyes: loss, uncertainty, and a yearning for connection. Slowly, she started offering him small gestures of help, pointing him toward community resources, teaching him a few words in French, and even sharing her own struggles and moments of vulnerability. For Kiwan, Marie's presence provided a rare comfort in an otherwise cold and unfamiliar world. However, survival in Belgium required more than just companionship. Kiwan took on whatever jobs he could find, dishwashing at a local restaurant, cleaning warehouses, and even odd labor tasks that paid under the table. The work was grueling, often under exploitative conditions, but he had no choice. Every cent counted as he tried to navigate a system that seemed determined to push him out. Things took a turn for the worse when he received an official notice of rejection from the immigration office. His asylum claim had been denied, and the authorities had set a date for his deportation. The letter felt like a death sentence, a cruel reminder that despite all his efforts, he was still considered an outsider, unwanted and unwelcome. The news hit Kiwan hard. He had fought so hard to survive, to build something from nothing, and now it all seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Marie, witnessing his quiet despair, found herself more invested than she had ever intended to be. Though she had long been accustomed to keeping people at arm's length, something about Kiwan's resilience stirred something within her, a desire to fight not just for him but for herself as well. Together, they began searching for alternative ways to stay in Belgium. Marie used her connections to seek out legal aid and support from local human rights organizations. They explored every possible avenue from appeals to humanitarian visas. In the process, Kiwan discovered something unexpected. He wasn't entirely alone. The refugee community rallied around him, offering advice, support, and even small gestures of kindness that helped him endure. As their bond deepened, Kiwan and Marie found themselves facing new challenges. Their relationship, once a source of comfort, became complicated by the looming uncertainty of Kiwan's fate. Marie struggled with the fear of losing someone she had finally allowed into her life, while Kiwan wrestled with the guilt of being a burden to the one person who had shown him kindness. One evening, as they sat on a quiet park bench, Marie asked him what he would do if he had to leave. Kiwan didn't have an answer. The thought of returning to a place where survival was nearly impossible was too painful to process. But deep down he knew he couldn't give up, not yet. Their fight wasn't over, but the clock was ticking. With every passing day, the threat of deportation loomed larger, forcing them to confront the reality of their situation head-on. Would Kiwan find a way to stay, or was he destined to become another forgotten name, lost in the bureaucratic shuffle of a system that didn't care? Time was slipping away, and Loh Kiwan could feel it in every anxious breath he took. The notice of his impending deportation loomed over him like an unrelenting storm. Every effort to overturn the decision had hit a dead end, and the realization that his stay in Belgium might soon come to an end gnawed at him relentlessly. Despite everything, he refused to surrender to despair. Marie, on the other hand, was fighting her own internal battles. As much as she tried to remain distant, she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling of losing Kiwan. In him, she had found a rare sense of connection, something she hadn't felt since her mother passed. But now, she was faced with the possibility of watching another important figure in her life slip away. Together they tried everything. Marie tapped into every possible resource: legal aid groups, refugee advocacy organizations, and even her own social circles. But the bureaucracy remained an impenetrable fortress. Kiwan knew that every passing day brought him closer to an outcome he dreaded but could do little to stop. Despite the overwhelming odds, Kiwan refused to waste what little time he had left. He threw himself into work, taking any job he could find to save money in case he had to start over elsewhere. The friendships he had formed within the refugee community gave him strength, and slowly he began to understand that survival wasn't just about staying in Belgium. It was about finding meaning no matter where life took him next. Through it all, Marie stayed by his side. Their relationship had grown beyond words, beyond the barriers of language and culture. She taught him how to navigate the complexities of Belgian society, while he reminded her that life was still worth fighting for, even in the face of uncertainty. They shared quiet moments in the city's hidden corners, talking about dreams that felt just out of reach, and for a while, they let themselves imagine a future together. But reality caught up with them. The final deportation notice arrived, a cold and emotionless piece of paper that sealed Kiwan's fate. He was given 2 weeks to leave Belgium voluntarily, or he would be forcibly removed. The weight of it was suffocating. The dream he had clung to for so long was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing left to do but face it. Marie struggled with the news in her own way. For so long she had avoided getting close to anyone, fearing the pain of loss. And now, just as she had begun to open up, life was pulling Kiwan away. She found herself caught between wanting to hold on and preparing to say goodbye. As the departure date loomed, Kiwan and Marie shared one final moment of honesty. Sitting by the river under the dim glow of the city lights, they acknowledged the reality they couldn't escape. Marie, with a bittersweet smile, reminded Kiwan that his journey wasn't over, that home wasn't just a place, but something he carried within himself. And Kiwan, for the first time in a long time, allowed himself to believe it. When the day finally arrived, Kiwan stood at the airport, staring at the departure gate with a heavy heart. Marie was there, standing a few feet away, her eyes reflecting 1,000 unsaid words. There was no grand farewell, no dramatic goodbye, just a shared understanding that this wasn't the end. As he walked toward the gate, Kiwan carried more than just his belongings. He carried the strength he had found in his struggles, the kindness he had received, and the belief that somewhere, somehow, he would find his place in the world. My Name Is Loh Kiwan is a poignant tale of survival, resilience, and the universal search for belonging. It reminds us that even in the face of insurmountable challenges, hope can be found in the smallest moments and in the people who choose to stand by us.